Welcome to EXP's Express Notes on CIMA P3 Performance Strategy. Today we want to talk about corporate governance. Now, corporate governance is a high-level view of the system by which companies are directed, hopefully in the interest of their shareholders. And the focal point is very much on the board of directors, and of course the system and hierarchy of controls and accountability that must run through an organization with regard to risk management and internal controls and internal audit and so on. What we want to talk about today is a couple of systems or models of corporate governance that the student should be aware of, and of course the contrasts which are reflected in what we would call shareholder-based models. This would be typical of the United States and the UK, and stakeholder-based models, which are more common on the continent. That means Germany, France, for example, Italy, and also in Japan. Now, just to put this in context, by stakeholder-based, we understand a system of corporate governance in which the concerns and interests of more than just the shareholders are represented at the top levels of a company. For example, if one has institutional shareholdings or interlocking shareholdings between companies, as is often the case on continental Europe, then of course there are more ways for interest groups apart from the shareholders to be involved in influencing the direction of the company. For example, banks may have shareholdings in the company but also lend to the company, and therefore as creditors they're wearing sort of two hats as stakeholders in the business. In Germany, where one has the form of a supervisory council which oversees the management committee of a company, the so-called sort of dual level system of corporate governance, if you will. The workers, for example, are represented on the supervisory board and therefore have a formal role in the direction of the company. So one can see here that there tends to be a broader range of views which were brought to bear in the stakeholder-based system. In Japan, for example, consensus is very, very important to the senior levels, and that points of view are brought to bear in various interests of the society. If we switch back to a more of a narrow focus on shareholder-based models as found in the US and the UK, for example, we can see here the concern generally tends to be a model which is adapted to a situation where shareholdings are very much dispersed among the population. So the shareholders basically themselves are going to be almost at the retail level. They're going to be a great number of scattered holdings, nobody having really an important control within the company from the shareholding point of view. Therefore, a broadly based publicly held company in which no one has particular power through their shares and share voting, and therefore the corporate governance models have to make sure that the shareholders' interests are being properly represented at the decision-making levels in the company. Now, if we stay with the shareholder-based models, we should make a further distinction between the US and the UK models. In the United States, there is a law called Sarbanes-Oxley, which addresses corporate governance issues at publicly held companies in America. And we have to understand that the US being a rather legalistic society, Sarbanes-Oxley is the law, and therefore it is mandatory to be implemented and followed at publicly quoted U.S. corporations. Otherwise, harsh consequences through the courts can follow, which include fines and imprisonment. So the Sarbanes-Oxley is a very serious piece of legislation, an attempt after the certain corporate scandals. For example, Enron, which is pretty well known in sort of the popular eye. Enron's case gave rise to this strong need to for the U.S. Congress to be involved in addressing the principles of, more than the principles, but the actual dictates of corporate governance as it should be applied in American companies. So that's one system. Coming closer to the UK, the Combined Code, or as it is now known as the UK Code of Corporate Governance, the UK system is a voluntary code which has been evolved over time. It is not a law, but it is, let's say, almost virtually morally binding on corporations in the UK to implement and to practice the principles of UK corporate governance. So this is a principles-based system. It's a set of best practices which are established. To list on the London Stock Exchange, one is required to be in compliance with the Corporate Governance Code, the Code of Corporate Governance in the UK. The body which oversees and has developed the code is called the Financial Reporting Council, and perhaps most impressive about the code is that it is not a long document. It spans about 40 pages and is easily read and easily digested by pretty much anybody. It's an easy to read document, and it's really quite a useful and interesting document. It can be downloaded from the website of the Financial Reporting Council, and in fact the student is encouraged to print off a set of the code. Okay, now the code is the result of a number of different committees which have addressed corporate governance, one of which we have mentioned before, and that was the Turnbull Commission, which addressed internal controls. And some of the key features of the code, some of the highlights as one goes through it, is the comply or explain feature, which means that when a company may not be in compliance with certain provisions of the UK Code of Corporate Governance, they are expected by the market and by their shareholders to explain why and to justify why they are deviating from or not in compliance with the code. Also, from the code, one can see that the board, in terms of its composition, at least half of the board should be independent non-executive directors. So the role of non-executive directors is extremely important in the British system of corporate governance, because this is what ensures the vocalizing of voices or points of view or opinions that may differ from the CEO of the company. In other words, that there's a diversity of opinions which are brought to bear. Another way of achieving this diversity of opinion and to avoid power from being concentrated in the hands of one person is the code calls for the separation of the chairman and CEO roles. This is also another important feature of the governance code. Non-executive directors, they have duties, responsibilities. They have to scrutinize the performance of management. They are not the executive directors themselves, but they have to be sure that the system of risk management and financial controls within the company are robust and defensible. The non-executive directors are also very closely involved in determining executive pay and pay packages. They also staff the audit committee, and the audit committee has as its principal role the overseeing or supervising the effectiveness of internal controls within the company, and to liaise with internal and external auditors. And so we can see that most of the great bulk of the UK Code of Corporate Governance is concerned with board structures and responsibilities up at the board of directors level. And then through the Turnbull report, there's a guidance on internal controls, and of course there's the work of the internal audit within the company. The internal audit has to test and make sure that the company's broad internal controls are working as they should. Now we know that internal auditors, of course, are employees. They report to the management, but they need to have a degree of professional independence, and therefore the internal auditors also have a direct line to the audit committee on the board where they can raise issues that may be of concern to them. The student is also expected to be acquainted with the CIMA ethical guidelines, which can be obtained on CIMA's website. Thank you.